Nothing was sacred. Everything was on the table to be ripped apart and started again. And I think we managed to do just that.
I'm Ian Powner, I'm Strategic Head of Technical. Right now, I'm responsible for research, quality and regulatory affairs, but also have a hand in intellectual property matters. When we're developing Confidence B, I also did the programme management, bringing all the various functions together on kind of weekly programme meetings to make sure we're driving to milestones and working collaboratively and not in silos. So that was quite an important aspect of what we had to do. I think principally working with the likes of Lee and the team, we split R&D between us. So I picked up the R piece, but also what we wanted to do is embed a sense of quality by design. And that meant we had to think very differently, very early stage in the process, about embedding new methods, new approaches to quality, developing new tests. We were using materials that were, up until this point, were pretty alien to salts. Hydrophobic membranes, new cover materials, new constructions, and right the way through that process, even when these were kind of concept designs on some of the design engineers' desks, myself and my team were thinking, along with the likes of Hayes Sulfaro, about how do we test this now? How do we set meaningful specifications that mean something to an end user when you come to think about product performance, but also about the quality of the materials in and of themselves. So there was lots we did in testing across the whole product, the filter, the new materials, the cover materials. Thinking back, there was an awful lot of work we did to develop tests, very early stage in the kind of concept design and development process. I think one of the biggest aspects of the product, one of the biggest challenges that certainly we set ourselves as a team, was to do the best job we possibly could in terms of developing the filter for the product. That for me was one of the standout aspects of the project, both in terms of the way, the internal construction. We created the stitch filter chamber with the design team, qualifying the hydrophobic membrane, the gore material, and the hoops we had to go through to get that qualified for our use case was an enormous amount of work. But also the testing that the quality engineering team did along with the design guys and created simulated use testing where we really stress tested with simulated output, hanging them for kind of inundated for 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, and then retesting constantly in these fast iterative loops to work out what was a kind of right perforation profile, have we got the stitch in the right position. But there was all these kind of, that was happening at the same time that we're also qualifying, new cover materials that got, new materials in them that we weren't familiar with handling, so we had to go through all that process as well. But, the filter and that kind of design for quality mindset and being clear on what a robust performance looked like was an enormous amount of work, and it took an enormous amount of people, time and effort to get it to that point. But, what we do see on the market right now is a filter that works brilliantly. I guess the other central aspect to this was working back from a patient perspective. We know that, or we knew at the time, that there was issues generally with products and ballooning and pancaking and the like. But when you start to think about how do you set a specification for this that has meaning to a patient and product performance, we found some research that was done back in the 80s that looked at the amount of flatus gas that was typically emitted by differing or various ostomate types. And I remember sitting in rooms wrestling long and hard with how does this translate into something meaningful in terms of a product spec, which then relates to how this might play out in terms of improving the life of ostomates. And we locked on the idea that, well, if we can clear the upper bound of flatus gas that we saw in this research study, then surely we could clear that in the shortest period of time and still scrub the odour that comes with this situation, then we're onto a winner. And that's deliberately the approach we took. It was kind of a bit of an epiphany, really, having wrestled with it for days and days and days in terms of how do we turn this into a specification. In all the testing that we do, all those tests were developed with the patient in mind to try and simulate use. One of the key aspects was within the overall project was always trying to do the right thing. Now, if you adopt a kind of a linear mindset to that, you miss opportunities. So, there were numerous occasions where Lee and the team, and as a collective, we'd make very last minute changes. And that meant that, we had to go back to the well, retest, revalidate, qualify our ideas, test out that these ideas are going to work. So those fast iterative loops, aren't linear, but it brings about better outcomes. There were some challenges along the way, but I look back on the time fondly, even if we seemed to be working 7 days a week, but it was a good time.